So I just thought it would be interesting to get together investigators from some of the main offshore centers to just discuss what information is available in their particular jurisdiction, the credibility of that information where it is available, how one goes about getting it, how much it costs, and to discuss some of the nuances of conducting investigations in small places. It can actually be quite difficult conducting investigations in small places because everybody knows each other and you're sort of all considered, or you're expected to be sort of a team player for the jurisdiction, even if you're an investigator, certainly my experience. So we have Craig Allam from the BVI, Gamal Newry from the Bahamas, Stuart Bostock from the Cayman Islands, and Bill Butterworth from Bermuda. They're all essentially private investigators. And I've asked them each to spend about 10 minutes just explaining for their particular jurisdiction what is available and how to get it. So who wants to start off? Okay.
My name is Stuart Bostock. I'm with Caribbean Investigative Network Limited in the island of Bermuda. I have a background in law enforcement and the last 20 years in the private sector. Bermuda, for those who don't know, is a British overseas dependent territory. It's about 20 plus square miles and located in the Atlantic Ocean, about 700 plus miles off Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. Population is about 62,000 and the economy is based on tourism and offshore company business, insurance and reinsurance. David's asked us to talk about the aspects of obtaining documents and information within the system in Bermuda. The Bermuda court system is primarily based on its law and practices on the British court system. The summary court, the magistrates court, and the Bermuda Supreme Court, the High Court, are both courts of record, which means that records are available. And whilst the administration of these courts, obviously in this day and age, is computerised, access to the information is not. For summary court records, you need in practice, you need the consent of the person that you're checking on, and you have to make a written application. The Supreme Court has a cause book in which, and this really is a step back in time, it's Dickensian in the sense that it's about 2.5 to 3 feet long, about 18 inches wide, and entries are written in, handwritten in on a daily basis. So when you go to search, there's no index. You have to, page by page, turn by turn, look for the record that you're trying to identify. Access is there for any member of the public. You can get in and obtain the information. However, if you're trying to get access to the Ritz summonses and the filings, unless you are a participant in the case or have the consent of one of the participants in the case, you cannot get documentation, as David's found out recently, or has been for some time. You can't get writs or copies of them until the case is completed and finished. With regards to corporate information, primary legislation is the Companies Act 1981. And I must say here that, with respect to the information available and given the restrictions of the law with regards to what is allowed, Bermuda has the best record as far as I can see, and obviously I've worked in Bermuda a long time, but I've done work in other jurisdictions, with regards to availability of information. The Registrar of Companies provides a working file which has the amendments and articles of association which are available, any changes, memoranda which indicates changes in capital. It has the prospectuses, deeds of mortgage and charge. There's a separate register for that, but by and large the deeds of mortgage and charge are available in the Registrar of Companies file. And then going beyond that, every company in Bermuda has to have a registered office or registered agent. And under the Companies Act, the various sections require that the registered agent or the company provide for public inspection the register of directors and officers, the register of members or share register, and I think it's a 2-hour period every day and they don't stick to that. You call them up, they'll provide you with the information, and normally within 1 or 2 days. In the 20-odd years I've been doing this, I've never been obstructed or had any issues in getting files from them. They're generally speaking, they're professional firms, and they're very much upfront. Just one thing, anybody who does apply to get them, and I've had practical experience of this, the agents who tend to be the corporate arms of law firms will notify their principals that someone is making the inquiry, and whilst I am not required to identify who my client is, obviously in Bermuda they know who I am because I'm in and out all the time, but they will inform the principals that you've been in making inquiries. And I think it may come down to dollars and cents because they then charge the principals for having to provide that service. The Registrar General, they have a whole gamut of documents available for inspection: births, deaths, marriages, land owned by locals, and also an aliens register which indicates any non-Bermudians who are owning land. All professional bodies are registered with the Registrar General, and licences are issued on a regular basis. There are registers search or check. Charities, friendly societies, that kind of thing are available. These records all have to be hand-searched. In fact, it's the one thing that, given the sophistication of Bermuda as a community, that for public records, most of it is hand-searched and there's no public records available. The official Gazette, once a week at least, any notices with regards to changes in government legislation, licensing, professional acquisitions organisation, building permits, trade and intellectual property marks are published in the official Gazette. There is only one newspaper now. It is the Royal Gazette. It was previously the Bermuda Sun, the Recorder and the Mid-Ocean News, but changing times, things have shrunk down. The publication of documents is done through the Royal Gazette. Accuracy of record keeping. I would say that the records that are maintained and available are, to a large degree, very, very accurate. I don't think there's any benefit to people to be fudging things unless they're deliberately conducting some kind of criminal activity. Persons wanting to hide things or avoid the secrecy, you may come up with what I call excuse my Russian, the Matreshka Effect, which is the Russian nested dolls. This company is owned by this company, which is in another jurisdiction and owned by another company. That does happen. What's new on the horizon for Bermuda is the Public Access to Information Act is coming in. It's a 1912 Act, but it is just being applied recently. And if you go to the various government websites, you will see that there's a icon to click on, which will give you the form to fill in to apply for the information. How this will affect the various government agencies has yet to be played out. Certainly, I know that the Bermuda Monetary Authority is, I believe, the term divesting itself of the responsibility or licensing it out to companies to do the due diligence on companies that they are regulating. I don't think they're getting rid of all the responsibility, but they're vesting the responsibility with licensed entities within the Bermuda community to do that part of the due diligence. Pass it back to you, David.
Yeah, just a couple of observations from my own sort of investigations in Bermuda. Bermuda has a very good reputation internationally, and part of that is undoubtedly deserved, and part of it is because really disputes in Bermuda are unusually secretive. So, for example, you're not entitled to copies of writs for civil cases that have been filed at Bermuda Supreme Court. That's very unusual. You are in most rival offshore jurisdictions, and quite frankly, in most, if not all, civilized jurisdictions. And Bermuda's law in this regard hasn't been changed since the 1950s. So, all you're entitled, you only even know a case exists in Bermuda by going to see the ledgers that you described, and some pages are actually torn out. I mean, there literally is nothing to prevent, a defendant from surreptitiously sort of tearing out any reference, to them being sued. But the Chief Justice has recommended to the Attorney General that writs do become available, and that's been on the Attorney General's desk for, I don't know, at least a month or so, maybe longer. I've actually asked him when this is going to be implemented, and I haven't had a response. And also disputes, Bermuda's a huge insurance and reinsurance center. Insurance contracts will have arbitration clauses, so there are all sorts of instances of fraud and allegations of fraud in Bermuda involving huge amounts of money, and often some of the best known companies in the world, and these disputes are sort of filed and arbitrated in secret. They very seldom make it into the public domain. And that is undoubtedly why Bermuda, doesn't receive a fraction of the bad publicity that it really should, because you don't even know these instances of fraud exist. And then when it comes to, but in other respects, Bermuda is very transparent. So you're entitled to see, as you mentioned, the register of members for even foreign-owned companies, which is quite rare in offshore centers. I mean, normally, if you are entitled to see registers of members, which are basically share registers, it's typically restricted to local companies. Bermuda, you can see them for foreign companies, but a lot of law firms and company management firms just put their nominee holding companies as shareholders. And then also in Bermuda, you can't see share registers for mutual funds, because the share register for a mutual fund is basically a list of its, investors, and I think that's quite reasonable not to make that available. And also, when you go, I have actually been a Bermuda substantial asset management company. They have billions under management, refused to show me the share register, and which was frightening, because the law was crystal clear that this had to be made public to anyone upon request for a statutory amount, which is minimal. It's like $10, $12 or something like that. And I thought, man, if you're not abiding by this law, what else aren't you abiding by? I mean, if you've got such utter contempt for the law, and this is crystal clear, there's no ambiguity, man, I'm frightened for your investors, because they manage billions of dollars. And anyway, I ended up seeing it because I had to bully them. I mean, the power of publicity is absolute, and I basically threatened them with bad publicity. I got the registrar of companies on the case, and and I saw it, but I shouldn't have had to have done that. So those are some of my observations and experiences of Bermuda. So, Gamal, do you want to talk about the Bahamas?
Sure. Good afternoon to everybody. My name is Gamal Newry. I am with Preventative Measures out of the Bahamas. We are a security management services offering investigative management services, also policy and procedure development. The Bahamas, for the most part, and if we want to start off with its structure, it's very similar to Bermuda in regards to its judicial system, based on UK law and UK climate. What we are looking at in the Bahamas as pertains to our judicial system is the opportunities that persons would have to get access to information. In the last 10 years or so, the government has done a great deal of computerization of its records. So many of the cases have been computerized, past and current cases are being computerized. Notwithstanding there is a backlog, however, there's been great efforts to computerize for computerized information access. What we have discovered through our work is that really, and Dave mentioned earlier about small communities. It's very much based on developing relationships with persons who are in the government, who are in the banking system, who are in the law firms, to get, how should I put it, information that may not make it to the online services. And I think that's crucial to piecing together what you can find and what's obvious and what's readily available versus what is unavailable or what is not seen, finding and filling that gap. For those of you who don't know, the Bahamas is an archipelago nation made up of several hundred islands. 30 of them are inhabited, and that presents another challenge because in many instances you have to reproduce yourself in these 30 different islands. And even though you may be quote-unquote a Bahamian, you still have to, when you go to an island, it's almost like visiting another island in the Caribbean because they have their own culture, they have their own perspective from those persons coming from the city, quote-unquote Nassau. And so you have these barriers, which is understandable because it's a small community, it's very close. And what is your intent? Is your intent to be beneficial to our community, or is there going to be bad publicity based on your discovery? So you find yourself in many instances determining, should you announce your arrival or should you wait until you get there? And really that depends on the type of cases that you may have to handle. But in any event, once you arrive, within moments, everybody knows that you're there in any event. And with the advent of smartphones, persons would have taken your picture, and so your surprise arrival is not very surprising. So with that in mind, like I said, we are this archipelago, this nation, and so we want to go out and create, as I mentioned earlier, relationships. I think it's key to any investigation, especially in small communities where, for the most part, persons know everyone, like it was mentioned earlier, and in some instances may even be distant relatives. So that's good and that's bad, of course, but you have to work with it as you may. One of the other concerns, or one of the other developments, I should say, is as it pertains to the online availability of information, is that because of recent, let's go back, say, to the time of Woodes Rogers, so 1718, the Bahamas has had a reputation for being a pirate haven. And because of that, in fact, at one point, our national motto was "Pirates expelled, commerce restored," to show you the severity of this problem over the years. And that's created, unfortunately, and I'll be frank and real, it's created a culture, a subculture, in some instances, where the society has sort of ingrained in itself things that are not in the best interest of outside investigators, be they local investigators or international investigators. What we have seen, too, is that, for example, in 1984, the United States put an action against the Bank of Nova Scotia for access to the accounts of several drug dealers. Of course, Nova Scotia resisted. However, the United States created, they put a fine against this company, almost about $1.8 billion. They didn't pursue it, but certainly the pressure placed on Nova Scotia caused the government, the whole banking sector, as a matter of fact, to reform a lot of our banking laws to ensure that, or to prevent us from being blacklisted in the future. Notwithstanding, after September 11th, based on our current banking system, we were still blacklisted. I say all of that to say that from one perspective, it doesn't shed a very good light on the Bahamas, but certainly from an investigative standpoint, it has forced the government, banks, and law firms to document and to sort of centralize and catalog the information. So that negative light that has been placed on the country has forced us to do certain things, making it a little easier to retrieve information. Not so much, for example, not so good for those persons who are trying to evade taxes, but certainly it does help when you are trying to acquire information. As I mentioned, there are about at least 30 to 40 laws that are related to banking trust companies that have been updated, and this information will be available to you also online. It'll be, I think our presentations will be available.
Yes.
So I have those links which will help, again, for you as you decide to do business in the Bahamas or identify individuals or groups who can assist. It's good that you do some of the groundwork yourselves so that you have a better understanding of what can be expected, what are some of the barriers, what are some of the obstacles that you're gonna face, and to make your job a bit easier. Now, like I said, it boils down to relationships. Like I said, in a community, in a society that is the size of the Bahamas, you want to make sure that you understand the value of developing those relationships, developing those contacts, so that when you decide to move in, when you decide to get your information, you have those contacts available to you. Okay, thank you.
In terms of court records, Gamal, what is available in the Bahamas?
We have both the Supreme Court and the Magistrate Court.
Like the civil, the Supreme Court?
Supreme Court, civil and criminal matters are available. They're available online, yes.
Okay. And isn't there a database, it's called something like CompTitle? Are you familiar with that? CompuTitle?
Yes.
CompTitle?
Yes.
And is that available to the general public, or?
It's available to the general public. You will make an application and you can get access to it.
Right. Okay. Craig?
Hi, good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Craig Allam. I'm working in the BVI. I come there via... sorry.
Hi, that's better. I come to the BVI via 30 years in the Metropolitan Police in London and 2 years in Trinidad and Tobago, and then 1 year in the Royal Virgin Islands Police. I haven't been on the BVI for that long compared to these guys here on their own islands, so I've put together a short presentation which will take us through the relevant parts of what we need to find out. Is it fitting the screen? Yeah, I've got it. Okay. All right. So generally, there are 5 major sources or main sources of information that we can get publicly. There's corporate registry, the High Court Commercial Court, land registry, shipping registry, and then the gazettes, sort of the government notices. So, corporate registry. So there are some of these figures are all approximate. I can't find exact numbers. I don't think anyone knows. So why do, basically, approximately 650,000 companies domiciled or registered in the BVI. We're going to ask ourselves what assets they're estimated to hold and how much do they bring to the BVI economy. The assets they hold, the last number I found is 3 or 4 years old, and again, it's an approximation because no one knows, but the number's huge. That was an approximation made in 2010. I haven't seen anything more recent. But the worth of the registration and the business to the BVI is 60% of its annual income, which equates to about $80 to $90 million a year. Just the figure of being 60%, it's very clear that it's extremely important to the BVI. So, why do they come? Well, for the respectable majority, we would say that it offers obvious tax advantages and it's protected by UK law, which I think is probably, as it is on the other hand, an extremely important factor to anyone thinking of registering a company, especially if you're going to partnership with other people, especially if they're not necessarily from the UK. For those who may not be quite so honest, I think probably the appeal of the lack of publicly available information, the important information, is attractive, albeit it has to be said this information is available through legal processes, and we'll go to that briefly shortly. But in other words, there is an expectation of confidentiality. I think people love to bandy around secrecy, but I think that's probably a little bit strong. So, registered agents are the keepers of all the information that, the really valuable information that you want, and they will have the register of directors. These can be filed voluntarily publicly, but they don't have to be, but they do have to be with the registration agent and the register of members. They don't require you to have an AGM, and the beneficial owner details, the ones we all want, have to be disclosed to the registered agent in what they call confidential due diligence. Of course, that's not always the case that the registered agent on the BVI has that information on the BVI. It's been discovered that they may have information that takes you to a third party, and the third party holds the ultimate information. And it is approximated that that could be the case in up to 80% of registrations. So they're probably going to refer you to another law firm maybe, or other agents elsewhere in the world who should then, it says in the BVI, provide the agent on the BVI with the information, and then should be provided through the legal process, which we'll go to. So what can we retrieve for you? Well, details of the original registration of the company, articles, and memorandum of association, company's standing, whether it's good, struck, or struck off, and annual fee payments since formation. At the High Court and Commercial Court, records are searchable. It's a personal visit. Again, we go to the 3-foot books, the 18 inches wide, records in very poor state, going back decades. Attempts have been made to computerize these. I think I wouldn't want to go so far as to say they've given up. It's a horrendous task. The software they're using is very poor, but the system is searchable. Land registry, personal visits, works like any other land registry, but again, it's all on paper, and you can go in there and sit down and scroll through their ledgers. Shipping registry requires both personal and written request. Basically, take the name of your yacht, and if it's registered in the BVI, you'll get the registration certificate, which will give you details of ownership, whether it's obviously personal or it could be a company, of course. And the BVI gazettes, much as anywhere, government notices of changes in legislation or other such goings on The FSA and the FIA can, on their website, and will issue warnings regarding all known scams and Ponzi schemes involving BVI companies that they've come across and that they're aware of. So it's a sort of just another little place to go and look. And we generally have a look on there. It's not, I don't know how up to date they keep it, but we're on and off there occasionally on behalf of other people. And the RVIPF, the Royal Virgin Islands Police, also have their own financial investigation unit. And it goes very much to Gamal's talk about contacts. BVI is only 28,000 people. Many of those are expats working in the financial services industry or the legal industry. And contacts is everything. And contacts for intelligence as opposed to what information. So at least we can find out what's going on. We may not be able to use it in that form, but it's helpful. So in the accuracy of information on the BVI, I think, excuse me, I think is as good as it is probably on any of the other islands. But the transfer of from paper to digital goes on, and I think has been going on for some time. As I said, there's still plenty of paper ledgers in use. Some of the software is from the ARC, so it's a challenge for them. And again, you're always relying on the people who are putting the information in. So, but I think generally it's pretty good. And I don't think, in my limited experience there to date, we've come across anything that was so obviously wrong or inaccurate. So the commercial culture basically is of confidentiality rather than secrecy. They really don't like hearing the word secrecy at all when you get into these conversations. So if you ever do, be gentle with them. Information can be obtained via competent authorities. So this is where we get to what you can get. And the competent authority can obviously be law enforcement. It can be us as a firm taking an order to a registered agent that we've obtained in the High Court. But it generally is an expensive and challenging process if you are, if we, on behalf of clients, are trying to get behind a company. Production orders are viciously expensive, which is something I only learnt when I got there, because I used to go and get 4 or 5 a day from a Crown Court judge in London in about 15 minutes. The process in a civil court is entirely different and takes a long time in preparation and then convincing the judge that you have a proper case that will authorize him, or will allow him to authorize you. There's no room at all for fishing expeditions, and the courts are the sole judge of what is a fishing expedition. So we have to take very good case to the courts. The BVI authorities have, on the whole, declined the UK request to create a public register of companies with beneficial owners available to everybody. And the grounds for that is that the information is already available. Yeah. If Labour win the general election later this month in the UK, then they say they will compel the BVI to set up such a register. Firstly, I'm not entirely sure, and I've discussed this with somebody already yesterday, whether Labour can compel the BVI government to set up such a register. However, I think the likelihood is that if they do get in power, the civil servants will probably sit them down and re-educate the ministers as to why they can't do that, or why it would be such a bad idea. I don't think we see that happening anytime soon. So that's basically it. Now the future is interesting, because just last week, very briefly, I'll just tell you, the Financial Services Implementation Unit has been authorised and formed, and I know that maybe not in this audience, but certainly at this conference is the gentleman who's going to head that unit up. And they have been given a list of tasks following a lengthy process of reporting on the financial services industry, of things to revamp, modernise, and generally try and bring into the 21st century where it maybe isn't. So I think that's a very positive sign for the BVI in general. And yeah, that's it. I think I've covered most of the stuff.
Yeah, just a couple of observations about my own experiences with the BVI and generally. You know, Britain can basically do what it wants with its overseas territories because it can take them over, as it did with the Turks and Caicos Islands not that long ago. So, you know, Britain has, you know, how much substance there is, who knows, but they've been sort of leading the way in terms of transparency or calling for transparency. But it just seems to be, you know, your typical empty political rhetoric. I mean, if they wanted to force Bermuda, not the Bahamas, which is independent, right. But the BVI and Cayman to have central registers of beneficial ownership and to have those made available to the public, they could do it like that. But I really don't see it happening, and certainly not in the BVI. BVI is one of my favorite jurisdictions. I think it's an excellent offshore center. It's got a great commercial court. It's very well organized. The regulation is good. Man, they even have prosecuted locals for corruption. And I can't tell you how impressive that is, because that seldom happens in small countries. So I actually have a lot of respect for the BVI. Having said that, it is the most secretive, certainly of the 4 jurisdictions we're looking at here. I regularly pull publicly available records in the BVI, and you know you're seldom, if ever, going to see the name of anything other than a nominee. So sort of at best you get the date of incorporation, you know, maybe been struck off 1 or 2 times and then restored to the register. And that sort of brings me to another point. The BVI, you know, is the king of incorporations. The jurisdiction receives a ton of revenue from the hundreds of thousands of companies paying fees. And it used to be that a sort of a good marketing boast to say that we have more, you know, companies in our jurisdiction than anywhere else. And I've been told that you know, to sort of keep that place, you know, as number one, the BVI like wouldn't strike off a company for 2 or 3 years if it had stopped paying its annual fees. Just so, you know, you wouldn't be removing, you know, as many companies from the register. I don't know how true that is, and maybe somebody from the BVI can counter that at the end. And certainly there did seem to be a drop-off in the official numbers. I think, Craig, did you quote something, 600 and something thousand? Yeah, I think it used, you know, like I can remember checking the stats maybe, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years ago or something, and it was about 400,000, but that was at the height where it was uncool to be number one in that category, you know, because there was so much international pressure. So maybe the climate has changed there where once again, you know, it is cooler. But and then when it comes to like court records, you know, OffshoreAlert, I send researchers to not the Bahamas court, but the Cayman Islands court and the BVI, and we get hold of all publicly available filings, and we publish those on our website, which anyone can search for free. And so the Ritz are available in Cayman and the BVI, but then not available in Bermuda, just the handwritten ledgers, which, you know, invariably contain spelling mistakes, you know, and so even though we have those computerized, just the listings, you have to be quite creative in how you search, because somebody's name might be, let's say, Alan Miller, A-L-A-N, M-I-L-L-E-R, but the entry might be Allan, A-L-L-A-N, and then Miller, M-I-L-L-A-R, which would typically be a Scottish spelling of that name. And that's one of the major flaws with how Bermuda goes about making court information, publicly available. It's just prone to errors, and you can't really, search engines are pretty unforgiving. If you make errors, you typically don't get hits. So anyway, we'll now move on to the Cayman Islands and Stuart Bostock.
I'll actually come up here, I think, because there's 2 times you don't want to speak. That's first thing in the morning after a very heavy reception hosted by the sponsors the night before, and the second time you don't want to speak is after lunch. So I'm starting to see some heads dodging a little bit there, so I'll try my best to wake you up a little bit. So my name is Stuart Bostock, and I'm an alcoholic. Oh, sorry, wrong presentation there. Yeah, my name's Stuart Bostock, and I'm from the Cayman Islands. To give you an idea, I was speaking at a Hitachi conference, Hitachi Global Conference in Vegas last week, and again right after lunch, and it was quite interesting because obviously Hitachi's a Japanese company, so they made everybody get up and do all this moving around to wake everybody up, and I thought it was quite interesting. But to give you an idea of, for those of you who don't know, the Caribbean region itself, Caribbean is made up of 30 sovereign nations and dependent territories, and houses somewhere in the region of 42 million people. And the reason I think that's important is because very few people really understand and appreciate the size of the Caribbean as its own region. Canada, for instance, only has 35, 36 million people. So if you look at the Caribbean as a nation, it's larger than Canada and a little bit smaller than the UK with 60, 65, 66 million people. Of those 30 sovereign states and territories, 14 of them are UK-dependent territories. So unfortunately, what you've heard so far today in terms of what information is available from Bermuda and the BVI, it's very much the same in the Cayman Islands. Historically, the Bahamas is the same way, and it's encouraging to hear from Gamal that they're starting to transition to moving a lot of their databases to electronic databases, because the information there, again, is hard to come by, not just so much from a privacy or secrecy issue, but from a general access to information issue. I operate a firm. We're headquartered in the Cayman Islands. We have offices in Bermuda and the Cayman and the Bahamas. So I'm fortunate where we have a reciprocal arrangement with Bill. We do quite a bit of work together, and as a result of the meetings here, hope to extend that to Gamal as well. There was a saying several years ago that the criminals went to Switzerland and the dirty criminals went to the Cayman Islands. I think that's somewhat changed over the last few decades as we've signed the various treaties and legislations to certainly not allow fishing expeditions, but have allowed for the exchange of information between territories who have legitimate criminal investigations underway. So from terms of information that's available, we've got, from company perspective, we've got local companies and exempt companies. Local companies, the information is very much accessible. You can go to the registrar, the general registrar. You can find out the date a company was registered. You can find out whether it's in good standing and where the registered offices are. From there, you then go to the registered office and you're able to determine who the directors and members are. For the exempt companies, there's really very little information that you can obtain. All you can obtain is when it was registered, if it's in good standing, and who the registered office really is. From a court list perspective, it's still manual. We allow for about an hour a year to go into the court registry, and we sit down and look through the court registry, and it is literally a list of all the cases that have been seen in the courts for that year, and from then you get a case number, and then from there you can pay another fee and you can actually look at the case file. But it takes about an hour of an investigator's time to go in and search a year of records. There is a subscription that you can get, and it's available for anybody. You can jump on to the Cayman Islands Cayman Islands Courts website, and you can enter your email address. And from there, they'll every day, when they publish the court list, they'll send that information to you. However, they have not taken the next step yet where you can actually search the historic records and the database, which is why it's still a manual search. There's also our judiciary website and law reports. Again, you can subscribe to. You pay an annual fee, and they push information to you on a regular basis. Some firms have invested the time, energy, effort, and financial resources to take some of those manual court lists and actually create their own internal databases. So instead of sending somebody down to the registry, they have basically sat there, handwritten every case file, when it was heard, and what the outcome was, and then they have created their own internal database for that. In terms of police checks, unlike the United States, we do not allow for police checks unless it is unless it's with the individual's consent. So you cannot do a police check on an individual legally unless you actually have the individual's consent. And I say legally because, as with many of the jurisdictions, I'm ex-law enforcement. Fortunately, long before body cameras were being worn. I'm ex-law enforcement, so from there, you know, we all obviously have our internal contacts that we use for obtaining certain information. But from a police check perspective, you can't gain that information. Similar with BVI and other jurisdictions, we have shipping registry and land registry as well. Land registry is very, very detailed. If you know an individual or a company's name, you can do a search to see whether they own any property. Alternatively, if you have a piece of property and you know the block and parcel number, you can determine who owns it. Obviously, if it's owned by a company, you then go into the local and exempt company aspect of things and try to drill down and find out who actually owns the piece of property. We do have also CEREVA, the Cayman Islands Real Estate Brokers Association. They again have invested in obtaining a lot more information about individual owners. Their main focus is very heavily business development driven, and they go to try and identify pieces of property that they can list. So they've actually spent the time and created databases that help them identify who owns particular pieces of property. So again, if you know somebody in the real estate area, you can get some searches that are done kind of behind the scenes a little bit and get a little bit more information that you wouldn't normally get through the land registry. And lastly, I think with a lot of the jurisdictions as well, we've got a very robust Freedom of Information Act, and it's still being tried and tested. It's been in play for a couple of years now, and from there you can actually write to a particular agency, government department, and apply for information that perhaps is not readily available, and they have a turnaround time of about 30 days in order to do that. And they don't necessarily have to give you the information, but it's just another way of accessing certain information which opens doors, and as anyone that knows that goes into the investigative side, it's all about opening doors. You open one door, which leads you into a room, and hopefully from there you can open other doors, and you just keep looking until you find your way out. So that's really what I've got to say. I don't know if there's anything in particular, David, that you want me to address other than what I've mentioned there. But unfortunately, the Caribbean and the UK territories, as well as some of the other European territories, have made their bed and have created history from privacy. If we don't use the word secrecy, we can use the word privacy. And certainly from a business perspective, that's important. And there's a very clear difference between tax evasion and tax avoidance. And as we all know, tax evasion is illegal, tax avoidance isn't. So a lot of the Caribbean countries have created their history based on tax avoidance and are now transitioning into the stage of assisting other countries with their tax evasion investigations.
So, you know, I want to reiterate the, you know, I send somebody to the Cayman court, and we have copies of the writs going back. In fact, every publicly available writ that has been filed at the Financial Services Division of the Cayman Court is available on the OffshoreAlert website, where you can search for free, and you have to pay if you want to download a document. And you can't just search by the names of the parties, but you know, anyone who's mentioned in the writ, and often you'll get directors who are mentioned. If Company A sues Company B, the directors will often be mentioned in the writ, and that's all available from our site. Could you pull up the file called Cedrus Registers, please? So, you know, Bermuda is very transparent. You're entitled to see, you know, share registers of pretty much any company, foreign or locally owned. Cayman Islands, just locally owned companies. But, you know, there's no guarantee that the offshore provider will honestly comply with a request. So I've told this story before, so I ask those who've heard this story before to indulge me. But I was investigating a Cayman company called Cedrus Investments that I knew to be run by a securities fraudster. In fact, he's banned from the securities industry in the United States, a guy called Rani Jarkus. So he just closed down his debt-ridden, scandal-plagued U.S. group that was based in California called Global Crown Capital, and just moved the assets to a Cayman Islands company that he'd formed and left behind the liabilities. And he had liabilities to customers, including pensioners, who he just blatantly ripped off, to the IRS, who had was a federal tax lien against the company's assets. Anyway, just he not only transferred the assets, but he's such an idiot that he put out a press release saying he transferred the assets, which was quite helpful to me in my investigation. And then I discovered that he hadn't formed an exempted company, and they call, you know, companies exempted because they're exempted from certain types of tax. They're foreign-owned, typically. He'd formed a local company in the Cayman Islands, which, you know, I was entitled to the share register for that company because it was a local company. So I sent somebody to the registered agent. It was Thorpe Alberga Law Firm. It's now Travis Thorpe Alberga Law Firm, because one of the most prominent attorneys in the Cayman Islands, if in fact not the most prominent and most significant and most important, subsequently bought into the firm. So anyway, my researcher, you know, asked for a copy of the share register and was told they couldn't see it, which is just blatantly illegal. And again, it goes back to this: if you're going to break this simple, unambiguous law, what else? What other laws are you breaking? What, do you think you're a law unto yourself? Anyway, so can you show that? Can you show it on this screen as well? Jesus. Okay, well, I apologize to, you know, half of my audience here. But, you know, I don't know whether it's that clear anyway. But this is, so they basically said you couldn't see it. I told the researcher, go back, you know, and insist. You know, I then had to retain an attorney, because they still refused. I had to retain an attorney in the Cayman Islands who's actually, I know he's here at the event, and he might be in the audience, which is ridiculous, because this is something that should be made available for like a statutory minimal fee, 10, 12 bucks or something. So I had to retain an attorney. So this is what was provided. This is one page. You can barely see it. But I determined that this was a fraudulent a copy. notwithstanding the fact that it contains the signature of Michael Alberga, who's the managing partner of that firm, very well-known attorney in the Cayman Islands, who's just a fraudster, right? This is all recorded. Michael Alberga, if you get to, hear and see this, if you want to come and sue me, be my guest, right? So, because, this sort of thing really, pisses me off, right? So this was what was provided after a lot of hassle. The left-hand column, the far left-hand column, the title is share certificate, right? Share certificates have numbers. It's blank. Well, that's suspicious. Then I note there's only one shareholder, which is the nominee holding company for the law firm to hold shares on behalf of clients and concealing their identity. Then there's another column that says the date that any shareholders, in this case just one nominee holding company, became a share register. Well, that date was, I think it was like 13 months after this company had been incorporated. And I knew that Cayman law, and I think this is just basically general law, whichever jurisdiction you're in, a share register or a register of members must contain a complete record of all shareholders since the date of registration. Not even the date of incorporation, but the date of registration is typically the same as the date of incorporation. It might vary by a day. So, the share certificate number was missing, and the reason it was missing is because the real number of that share certificate was either 2 or 3, which would have, even an idiot could have seen, okay, well, where's number 1 or 2? And also the date of the first entry, it was 13 months after it had been incorporated. Now, I knew enough about the law that it must contain a complete record of all past and present shareholders. It took me 3 years. I actually let that go for a few years, and then I revisited it a few years later. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to exercise my right to physically inspect the actual register, because Michael Alberga, who was personally handling this, clearly was dishonest. He clearly couldn't be trusted to provide a true and accurate copy, as his corporate stamp and his signature stated this fraudulent copy was. So I knew I was entitled to actually see the underlying register, which we did. And can you switch over to the second page? Okay, so this is what that other page should have looked like, because the share registers look like this from the beginning. You'll see that he missed out 2 entries there, and you probably can't see it, but the name of the crook I was investigating was on and is on the share register. So he'd blatantly given me a fraudulent share register, as easy as breathing, put his stamp, his signature, saying it was a true and accurate copy of the original, which it clearly wasn't. And he took me for an idiot, basically. Michael Alberga is a classic example of certain people in the islands, just have their head in the sand. They still think it's the 1980s where they can do what they want. And really, the offshore alert is very well known in the Cayman Islands. And if you familiarize yourself with offshore alert, we're pretty relentless in terms of investigation. So I think he was just, apart from being dishonest, he's just ignorant. And so the point being is, even where you are entitled to have copies of share registers, and actually, you need to know exactly what should be on them, and to look for warning signs that what has been produced to you might not be honestly given to you, and it might not be an accurate record. And often, well, not often, occasionally, it's happened to me 2 or 3 times in offshore centers where, even though I've been entitled to copies of share registers, I've sent somebody to the registered office and they've said, no, you can't have it. And certainly in the Cayman Islands, you basically would have to take legal action, which can be expensive. You're a foreign party, which means you would typically be required to put a substantial amount of money into the court as security for costs should you lose, even though there's really no chance of you losing a case like this. So, you know, if any of you do request to have a copy of a share register and you're refused, I welcome you to come to Offshore Alert, because I've got it pretty much down pat at the moment I publicly embarrass them into just complying with the law. So I will write about it, I will blog about it. If you can't comply with this law, then, my guess would be that you're breaking other laws, and you have to browbeat them into complying with the law. The alternative route, as I said, is to take legal action. And most recently, for those of you who've been following the Caledonian Bank collapse in the Cayman Islands, the most recent denial of a request on behalf of Offshore Alert for a copy of the share register involved the Caledonian bank group, and I got on the phone with somebody after my researcher was denied access, and it was an incredible conversation where a guy whose sole job is to serve as a registered agent didn't know something as basic as, for a local company, the share registers are publicly available, and I had to apprise him of the law, which is extraordinary. And also another sort of anecdote from the Cayman Islands, Bermuda, has these ledgers, and, you can rip pages out. In the Cayman Islands, the Legislative Assembly has a register of members' interests. And again, this is like a handwritten ledger where political representatives, elected representatives, are required to disclose their business interests. And there was one classic example in the late 1990s of a fraudulent bank collapsing called First Cayman Bank. And Cayman's best-known politician and on-again, off-again leader, McKeever Bush, one of the most corrupt politicians the Caribbean's ever known, either he or a representative went to the Register of Members' Interests, where he disclosed that he was a director of this fraudulent bank, and the page was just torn out. That's which is the height of unsophistication when it sort of comes to record keeping and abuse of that. Official gazettes, which all of the British overseas territories have, and the former overseas territories, so for example the Bahamas, these are gold mines of information. So if a foreigner typically wants to buy property, it would have to be published in the official gazette. If a foreigner wants to become effectively a citizen, or have status, as they call it, it would have to be published in the official gazette. If you change your name, it will have to be published in the official gazette. And in the 1990s, Grenada became a haven for criminals. And a lot of these criminals used to change their name, and there was one notorious banking group called the First International Bank of Grenada, which was run by a crooked American whose real name was Gilbert Allen Ziegler. And when he went to Grenada, he changed his name to Van Arthur Brink. The Brink was named after the Brinks truck that carries money. Gives you an insight into his attitude towards conning people. And that's how I found out that this guy in Grenada was this same guy in the United States who had committed he'd run a string of failed companies in America before going to Grenada. And if you're searching for assets, property ownership records are golden. So these official gazettes, many of which are online, and searchable actually just via Google. You know, they're great sources of information.
Might I also add too, with regards to the gazettes, I don't know about the other territories, but certainly in the Bahamas, there has been a move by the government to make certain publications like change of names, requests for citizenship. The local newspapers now, the gazettes are actually published in the local newspaper so that it's more publicly known or publicly aware, as many of the gazettes are, unless you go looking for the gazette, you won't see it. But certainly name changes, citizenship, requests for citizenship by foreigners, those types of things also, of late they have been determining certain property, depending on the value. The local newspapers, the two main newspapers that is, have been, quote unquote, become the official gazette, and that it's public to a wider audience in the country.
Do we have any questions over there? Could one of you AV guys pass the mic around, please? It's important that everybody speaks into the mic because we're recording everything, and it doesn't appear if they don't speak into the mic.
I can speak loudly enough. That's all right.
Even that, Jan, wouldn't be picked up. Could somebody please pass the mic? Jesus. All right, go ahead, Jan. Go ahead.
Your statements about the people are broadly speaking very accurate, but with great respect, Mr. Martin, you are wholly ignorant of reinsurance arbitration. I have been doing insurance and reinsurance disputes in Bermuda for 25 years. I've got 3 arbitrations on there at the moment. Last week there, none of them runs about 75 million to 35 million. Never in my entire career in arbitration have I ever seen a scenario where there's some 30 board names which you'd like to write about in your magazine being someone concealed in arbitration. That's not what confidential arbitration is about, and I respectfully disagree with your theory about what arbitration is for. Thank you.
Okay, but I didn't say arbitration was for that, but the arbitration disputes, they're not public record, right?
Correct.
That was my point. Right, but I'm just saying they're not public. It's a dispute, and in civilized societies, you know, disputes are typically aired in public. And, so just off the top of my head, fraud, Bermuda insurance companies, OffshoreAlert exposed probably $1 billion fraud by Sterling Cook Brown Holdings, which was a Bermuda insurance broker listed on NASDAQ, sponsored by Goldman Sachs, who controlled it. And it was a criminal enterprise, and we exposed it the same month it went public. Goldman Sachs controlled a criminal enterprise. I mean, it surprised me then in the late 1990s. It does not surprise me now because I'm a decade the wiser. And Wall Street amped up the share price from 22 or $22.50 per share, which was the IPO price, based on crap. And the whole machinery was in place. It went up to 30-odd bucks. We exposed it the same month it went public. And a few years later, the inevitable happened. The share price went down to zero. It was delisted. And there were arbitration disputes in secret, but the documents were leaked to me. And it was rampant fraud. And one of the perpetrators of this, Mark Cook, the Bermuda authorities did this, right? Nothing, $1 billion fraud, and Mark Cook just went back to Bermuda and he runs another insurance brokerage. I mean, it's shocking. And the guy at Goldman Sachs, he was a managing director based in New York. he went on to, who was a director of Sterling Cook during its entire crime spree. And this was a crime spree, I'm not exaggerating. He went on to become the chairman of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. His name is Reuben Jeffrey III. And I tried as a journalist 4 times to warn Goldman Sachs about this fraud. And 4 times they never responded to emails, to phone calls, to any form of communication on my part. But anyway, so I'm not saying the reason I'm sure there are many legitimate reasons for arbitration disputes being in secret, but they are nevertheless in secret, which was my point. Any other questions? Particularly hostile ones. I love this sort of thing. Okay. Do you have one, Miranda? Okay, go ahead.
Oh, okay, we don't mind.
Yeah, the mic's collapsed. Oh, here it is. Here. I'll get a discount on my AV bill, right?
So the question I had recently when I was looking into Gulnara Karimova and her assets in different offshore jurisdictions, one of the things we were able to obtain were the correspondence between the registration and agent who was handling her companies and the registrar itself. And in the email correspondence, that would be usually a form and then an attachment. And if they were looking for a special certificate, which would contain, for example, name of director and so on, they would also file a registry of members and a registry of directors. So my question is whether any of you have ever tried to explore that option of getting the communication between the registry and the registration agent, and were you successful in obtaining more documents than are typically available if you just make a request for search?
Is there any particular jurisdiction?
This was the case of British Virgin Island, actually.
I mean, that sort of thing sounds like a court action, right? You'd need to go to the court route.
Yeah. We just basically go to the registry and ask for stuff. I mean,
what did they give you?
They basically gave us forms that the registration agent regularly files.
Yeah,
But also the original email, so we were able to get the letters.
Oh, originally, you know what? That sounds like carelessness to me, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I get documents all the time from publicly available documents all the time from the BVI, and they say nothing. I've never been fortunate enough to have an email header that obviously will reveal. Something.
And actually it was in, at the time requested for 20 companies, and for 5 or 6 of them we were able to get all the files, and then for a bunch of them they didn't send us the files that were attached, but they sent us a form with all the details. And I didn't know why
that almost certainly will be a mistake that might cost somebody their job. Can we have the mic here, please? At the front? It's here, but it doesn't get picked up if you shout.
Hi, Bill McIntyre, Private Investigator, Orlando. I was interested to know from the speakers, this tome, book, register, call it what you will, that you look through, it sounds like it might be falling to pieces if all these people are lining up to turn the pages and they're just handwritten pages. Do you have a special room? Is it kept, you wear gloves? Is it protected in any way, or are you sitting in a public lobby at the bar?
Well, when I lived in Bermuda for 6 years, I used to go into the court, 2 or 3 times a week, and they would just give you they would go in the back, give you the ledger of the period that it was relevant to that you asked for, and nobody would monitor you or supervise you. You'd do it like in a public area rather than a private area, but there was no other members of the public there, and if the staff weren't watching you, you could have easily ripped something out. And there were pages that were torn, and even where pages that weren't torn, I mean ink had faded, there were just natural tears, spelling mistakes galore. Just human errors.
The registers are available at the Registrar of the Supreme Court. The current registers going back to the last 10 years are available publicly. The others are archived, and as David has pointed out, they're in bad state of disrepair, and some pages are loose. But without excusing it, the ones that are current, I've yet to see any pages torn out, but I don't vouch for the older archived registers, which may have pages that are loose and what have you. And they are in the back, in the archive office. Sometimes they bring the registers out, other times you have to go out to the back, go into the back office to search.
And OffshoreAlert has, like most of the Bermuda court details from 1987 to the present. I think there's probably a 3 or 4 year period where they wouldn't let us do it in an efficient or sane manner. So there's a gap, but we do have most of them in that time frame, which is whatever, 18 years or so. Okay, we got to wrap up now because there's another session. Thank you very much.